Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all, for those of you who are out there watching this thesis defense, to Shannon Temaat's defense of her thesis titled The Portraits of King Henri Cristophe of Haiti and his son Jacques-Victor Henri Cristophe, Two Jewels of Nineteenth-Century Painting, a translation from Spanish into English of Los Retratos de Henri Cristophe, Rey de Haití, y su hijo Jean-Victor. Why is it Jean-Victor? Henri Cristophe, Dos Joyas de la Pintura Decimonónica by Jennifer Solivan-Robles. Okay, I'd like to welcome you all, and also I'd like to thank I'm sorry, I'm getting some confusing messages here. I'd like to thank the readers on this committee. I'd like to thank you very much for your time and your efforts, Professors Jane Ramirez and Nicholas Faraclas. So we will begin in a moment with Shannon presenting on her project, on her thesis project, and then we will have a discussion of that project headed by the readers on this committee. So Shannon, if you don't mind, if you could present your project, and then we'll get going.
Okay, I will go ahead and share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. And I hope you're able to hear me okay. Okay, wonderful. Welcome. I'd like to acknowledge Advisor Dr. Auerbach, my committee, Professor Ramirez and Dr. Faraclas, professors at the PGT who have prepared me so well for my degree in translation, and professors in the English department who have also been really instrumental in my learning. I would also like to acknowledge the unwavering support of my husband, my children, and my family. The portraits of King Henri Cristophe of Haiti and his son Jacques-Victor Henri Cristophe, Two Jewels of Nineteenth-Century Painting, is a translation of Los Retratos de Henri Cristophe, Rey de Haití, y su hijo Jean-Víctor Henri Cristophe, Dos Joyas de la Pintura Decimonónica, por Doctora Jennifer Solivan-Robles. The background, I have always been drawn to revolutionary history. My birthplace and childhood home is the state of Virginia. Historically, it was the first colony that would later become the United States of America, and the location where the British Army surrendered control during the American Revolution. I do remember as a young girl playing along the battlefields of Yorktown while my father demonstrated the art of 18th century coppersmithing and designed historical pieces. Throughout my life, he continued to introduce me to artistic renderings of revolutionary triumphs in the museums that we went to as we traveled throughout the United States. When I came to the PGT, it seemed very natural for me to follow my interests and enroll in the museum translation course taught by Dr. Auerbach. I enjoyed our class translation project for Art as Re-existence, Afro-Puerto Rican Works at the exhibition in the Museum of History, Anthropology, and Art at the UPR in April of 2023. I went on to collaborate with colleagues and Professor Auerbach on publications in Visión Doble. So when it came time for me to choose my thesis, it seemed quite natural to look for opportunities to collaborate with Visión Doble, to give back to my university, also to align myself with Puerto Rican voices who are telling revolutionary stories. The Spanish text I've chosen is a scholarly one. It is intended for publication in Visión Doble. It has not been published as of yet. It was chosen in collaboration with the editor, Dr. Laura Bravo, and the author, Dr. Jennifer Solivan-Robles, and my thesis advisor, Dr. Auerbach. The background of the source text is a historical one. Shortly after the victory of the American colonies at Yorktown, Virginia, the Marquis de Lafayette, who fought alongside George Washington, provided his commentary, "Humanity has won its battle, liberty now has a country." Lafayette would go on to co-author The Rights of Man, inspiring revolutionary ideas in France and in the French colony of Saint-Domingue in the Caribbean. Saint-Domingue was known as the Pearl of the Antilles. It was the sugar capital of the world at the time period, relying on the enslaved labor of Afro-descendants. Statistics from the transatlantic slave trade and the inter-American slave trade document that the system of enslavement was organized such that the enslaved worker would not last 2 years. In the PBS documentary, Égalité for All, Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution, Jean-Claude Martineau, historian and former Haitian presidential spokesperson, asserts the following: "Liberty, equality, fraternity, that was new for the world. The enslaved inhabitants of the French colony of Saint-Domingue fought the French, British, and Spanish armies for 12 years. The Haitian Revolution is probably the most profound revolution ever realized by human beings. The only place where slaves created a nation, but nobody wants to talk about it." The documentary goes on to assert that when the successful anti-slavery and anti-colonial insurrection ended in 1804, it had affected the institution of slavery throughout the Americas. Self-liberated slaves destroyed slavery at home. They fought to preserve their freedom, and with the collaboration of mixed-race peoples, founded the sovereign state of Haiti. The Haitian Revolution was the only slave uprising that led to the founding of a state free from slavery and ruled by non-whites and former captives. With the increasing number of Haitian revolutionary studies in the last few decades, it has become clear that the event was a defining moment in the racial histories of the Atlantic world. The legacy of the revolution was that it changed long-held beliefs about Black inferiority and of the enslaved person's capacity to achieve and maintain freedom. Moving on to a summary of the source text. In the source text, the author gives an historical and artistic account of Richard Evans' 19th century portraits of Henri Cristophe and his son Jacques-Victor Henri Cristophe, discussing their importance in relationship to the time period and to the British abolitionist William Wilberforce. The portraits, which are actually located in the UPR library system, have been briefly studied by art historians and scholars, but they have not received the attention that they deserve. This article presents a new perspective on the life of Christophe as he was seen through the eyes of Wilberforce. The author claims that the portraits are not merely the currency of diplomatic exchange, but rather Wilberforce's idea of Christophe, since Evans actually painted a perspective that can't be appreciated by other representations of the monarch. The author goes on to conclude that Wilberforce was influenced by the ideas of Romanticism. These ideas permeated art in the 19th century, and they played an important role in the abolitionist movement. This helped see this Black king in light of his true nobility and equity. At one point, these paintings were thought to be lost, and so knowing that they are at the UPR is an important part of the research. Looking at the perspective, Wilberforce's perspective is the lens that the author uses to examine the paintings. But let me give you a little bit of the author's background. Dr. Jennifer Solivan-Robles is a contributor to Visión Doble, Revista de Crítica y Historia del Arte, an art history journal that is published by the art history program at the UPR, and she's preparing the Spanish source text for publication. Currently, she's a professor in the Department of Humanities, School of General Studies at the UPR. She graduated from the university's art history program and holds a PhD in art from the University of Salamanca in Spain. Solivan-Robles taught at the Escuela de Artes Plásticas y Diseño de San Juan. She's worked on art and medieval projects for Bloomsbury Publishing, and she recently received the Francis A. Yates Short-Term Fellowship at the Warburg Institute in London. Dr. Solivan-Robles is passionate about researching and uncovering historical art pieces that are housed in Old San Juan and at the University of Puerto Rico. The contribution of the translation. First, let me address the author's audience. The author's audience is to scholars of Haiti, art scholars, art history scholars, and it is a scholarly journal article that is written to art critics as well. Obviously, it's to Spanish speakers. My audience, as I translated her work, has become an international one. I translated this from the perspective of reaching an international English-speaking audience to make them aware of Dr. Solivan-Robles' research. The contribution of the translation, it was not until my extensive research concerning the historical background of the source text that I discovered there's many English speakers who still have not heard of the Haitian Revolution. Much of the history is preserved in French texts, which makes sense. The international community continues, unfortunately, to view Haiti as just another tragic headline, and few have actually heard of Henri Cristophe's story, which I believe is beautifully captured in these paintings and is a gateway to maybe them doing further research on their own into the Haitian Revolution and the history of the Caribbean. This text, I believe, is an exceptional introduction to Christophe, who was born enslaved. He became a revolutionary for the independence of Haiti, and he fought to establish the first Haitian monarchy. Details of his accomplishments and how he was viewed by Wilberforce are also not widely known, especially on an international scale. And a translation of the text would introduce Christophe as well as Evans' paintings to English speakers who are interested in both art and history. Readers would be able to explore, like I said, research surrounding the first Black king of the Caribbean and engage with a text that challenges their understanding as well as their representations of Black nobility. I do believe that an international audience of Haitian scholars of Haiti would also be introduced to the priceless art collection housed at the UPR. And the author's publication and research will be made available to a wider audience. Currently on loan to the Royal Academy in London for the first time since their debut in 1818, these two jewels of 19th century painting are starting to gain renewed interest, and I believe they deserve to be explored. You can see on the right is the actual details of the painting. I would like to talk a little bit about the challenge of an unpublished text. When I started this process with Dr. Solivan-Robles, it was my intention to translate a published text. She was in process of collaboration, and I found that collaborating with an author who has an unpublished work is an exciting task, but it's also a daunting task. I actually spent July through October of 2023 researching the source text. I had decided on it, had met with the author, had briefly spoken with through email with Lara Bravo and with Solivan-Robles, and had gotten permission to go ahead and to start the project. So I started early in the summer researching. And then in January 2024, I was translating the first 4,037 words with the understanding that any revisions would be provided to me by November. So I began my research, began my translation July to October, and then in November I was going to receive the final revisions to the source text, and it was going to be published in January. So when I was completing my first 2 sections of the translation in January, I was already supposed to have that finished source text in print. Unfortunately, in January, I received the introduction of a completely revised source text with 14 new bibliographic references and 1,500 revisions. That was a surprise to me. So each time the author's timeline changed, mine did too. And Dr. Auerbach was so insightful in helping me as my advisor through this process. He got many emails from me saying, what do I do? All these changes to the text. I spent January through March translating then the revised text that I had been given. So the original source text was 11,521 words, and the revised source text was 14,909 words. Through the entire process, I completed 7 sections. And so what that meant was I completed 7 sections of 2,000 words each, even though I was only able to use 5 of the sections from the revised source text for my thesis. So at that point, I had already translated more words, and the author's extensive revisions and protected timeline just left me with a couple options: either extend the timeline into another semester, make the thesis a much bigger project than the 10 to 12,000 word count requirement that it originally was set for, or go ahead and translate only a portion of the article. So I solved the problem by translating a portion of the article, found a logical stopping point, and revised the source text of the revised source text. This changed my project from the complete translation, including the bibliography, to a partial translation of the new source text, omitting the bibliography. I believe overall these challenges helped me improve in the style and register of the text, and helped me in my research. So I have completed a partial translation from Spanish to English of the author's revised source text. The source text is 14,909 words, and my target text ended up being 10,787 words. The other challenges were going back and forth with the author herself. We met through email, sometimes we met through Zoom meetings, and she tried to make her research as available to me as possible, and I really appreciate that. It was exciting to be able to see her process, but also challenging to work through my own process. But I feel like it gave me real world experience, because translations very rarely go as planned, and we very rarely know what we're getting ourselves into until we actually start into the translation. Let's talk about some textual challenges. This is a picture of the painting of the prince with the details. As you can see, it meets the same size and was done in at the same year as the painting of the king. Art history textual challenges that I encountered included going beyond the linguistic and cultural differences to include stylistic choices, ethical issues, copyright laws, the particular names of works of art. The name of an art piece found in multiple sources isn't always the correct title of the work. So I found this to be challenging in my translation of the source text, especially with references that dated back to the early 19th century. The paintings of the king and the prince discussed in the source text were never signed. Their names were never standardized in English. References to both portraits have been made in Haiti, England, the United States, and Puerto Rico from different time periods using different English names. The king's painting appears as Retrato del Rey de Haití Henri Cristophe in the source text, and I will briefly mention a few of the English title variations that I ran into. Henri Cristophe, King of Haiti, is the English title that Rosalie Smith McCrae used in the British Art Journal in 2005, when she lists the painting as housed in the Musée Panthéon National in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. This title also appears in the online caption of the King's portrait taken by Dr. Solivan-Robles. Paul Klammer, however, in his book Black Crown that just came out in 2023, Henri Cristophe, The Haitian Revolution and the Caribbean's Forgotten Kingdom, captions the picture of the painting as King Henry I of Haiti, because the king actually declared himself as King Henry with the spelling Henry. The paintings by Solivan-Robles that she is referring to housed at the UPR are currently on loan in London. So Portrait of King Henri Cristophe and Portrait of Prince Victor is how the April 2024 exhibition at the Royal Academy is displaying both of these paintings. Since that is not how they have been referred to previously, I decided to choose the original English titles. And you can see on here, Solivan-Robles, her translation of the King's painting title is on the left, followed by an example that I included of her translation of, that's supposed to be the prince's title. That is a typo, I apologize. We're gonna look over at the parallel text though, and I used many parallel texts as I was going through this to decide what would be an appropriate rendering of the title. As you can see that Rosalie McCrae has Henri Cristophe, King of Haiti. Paul Klammer, in his well-researched book that just came out, uses King Henry I of Haiti. And then if you look at how the Royal Academy is displaying this in 2024, they have the title listed as Portrait of King Henri Cristophe. My translation, I actually went back to the very original. I went back to the original from when it was displayed in the at the Royal Academy. And so I followed the dictionary of the displays at the Royal Academy in London from the official records provided by Algernon Graves. The first exhibition of the paintings actually took place in 1818. This was just 2 years after they were painted by Richard Evans. He was still living, and Christophe's story, although it was highly controversial at the time, was already widely popular in London. So since there is such discrepancy surrounding the English names of both portraits, and since this is an art history article, I chose the original English text from 1818 for both portraits and expanded the target text to also mention the English title used by McCrae and Dr. Solivan-Robles. So in my translation, it ended up being His Majesty Henri Cristophe, King of Haiti. And then as you can see, I included in parentheses, I included also titled Henri Cristophe, King of Haiti. I did the same for the princes, Prince Victor Henry, Prince Royal of Haiti, again using those spellings from the first exhibition in 1818. And then I, in parentheses, included also titled Royal Prince Jacques-Victor Henri Cristophe. Again, I followed what McCrae and Solivan-Robles had done in the parentheses, so as not to be confusing. Some other changes that I made, since both paintings are currently on loan in London. I also made note of this in the target text for readers and changed the author's use of actualmente se encuentran, or currently located, to housed. There were concerns relating to style and specialization, especially in the descriptions of the portraits themselves. This required extensive research in the grand manner style and artwork from the neoclassical and romantic eras. For this, I used reverse image searches, and I also used a lot of internet searches on the internet just to find the images. This proved to be difficult, but I wanted to include an appendix for my readers, since I included an appendix of the pictures simply because there are no pictures in the original source text. Remember, this is an unpublished text, so Dr. Solivan-Robles' source text did not include any images. So this was really important as I was doing the translation. I'm going to go back a minute. It skipped a slide. I had to do extensive bibliographical research, and that took the most time in this translation. I had to go back, like I said, to early 19th century sources. There were primary sources and secondary sources that I had to look at. I had to research the entire bibliography of Dr. Solivan-Robles, as well as the source text itself, and find parallel texts that also helped with some of these issues. There were some troublesome quotations and footnotes that I had to actually change for my English-speaking audience. So looking at this slide on the left, in the source text, footnote 10 follows a block quotation and is in English. Since the Spanish block quotation is not helpful for English readers, I chose to remove the English footnote and place it directly within the text as the block quotation instead of the Spanish one. So it reads in my translation, Haitian business was what now so much engrossed him. His first consent to enter into correspondence with Christophe led to an assurance that they would take anything from him. Wilberforce, and that comes from the Life of William Wilberforce, the 4th volume. So there are structural changes to the target text because the source text had to be changed for an English-speaking audience. So that is reflected in the footnotes as well. Looking at linguistic challenges, I had multiple languages. The source text has many proper names, toponyms, and historical figures. Some of them have already established translations and had to be included. A common characteristic of English writing is the reference to a person by their last name once they've already been introduced in a text to the reader. And in the source text, the author alternated between first and last names throughout. I found this confusing for an English reader, so I had to standardize the target text to only include full names or last names of individuals, with the exception of the young prince, who is named after his father. I found this also confusing, and since he is referred to as a boy of 11 or 12 years old at the time, I referred to him by Jacques or Prince Jacques. The text also includes Spanish, Latin, and English, and French phrases, quotations, source text, and allusions. So this was very challenging since I wanted to translate everything for a scholarly English-speaking audience without assuming upon their knowledge of other languages. I decided to keep only Latin and French words that appear in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and since my knowledge of French is very limited, I used DeepL to translate and to convert French quotations into English, and I had my advisor, Dr. Auerbach, review them, so I found that to be extremely helpful in dealing with these other languages. I also included a translator's note wherever I translated the original French. Since the English affords precise terminology as well as cultural sensitive and inclusive language, this was an issue as I worked on the target text. I made adaptations wherever the information or the author's intent could be misunderstood. For example, the words of the words produced and commissioned to be sent were more specific adaptations of encargados and enviados in the source text. The meaning of the recurring phrase recurso diplomático was lost for the reader. It was very confusing. So I adapted it to diplomatic currency and diplomatic exchange, which were common practices I researched in my research, found out these were common practices of the time period. The meaning of the word vano was lost if I just translated it as span, hollow, or opening. So I chose the synonym arcade, which refers to a covered area with arches and columns. And this was the background of where the king is standing in his painting. The author also describes Christophe's boots in the painting as color amarillo indio, Indian yellow. And we went back and forth about this a little bit, trying to figure out what this could possibly mean. So in my research, I found out that this could refer to an organic lacquer traditionally used in artistic painting to provide translucent golden yellow color. Unfortunately, this seems confusing since it referred to the artist's actual technique instead of the color that they appear to the viewer. So I used parallel texts to help me with this, and the word brown was used in describing the king's boots. So I adapted the text since Indian yellow is not a standard color used in English. Most importantly, I was careful to use appropriate terminology when referring to the heinous institution of slavery. Individuals who were forcibly captured from Africa and taken to the French colony of Saint-Domingue. A common translation of amo into English as slaveholder is offensive, as slave owner is offensive. So instead, I translated this as slaveholder, a more appropriate term. I believe it preserves the meaning of amo while acknowledging that louverture was held against his will, as was the majority of Saint-Domingue's Afro-descendant population. Grammatical changes within the source text, I felt were easily solved by transposing the text, changing the part of speech of a word in the source text, or for a more accurate part of speech in the target one. This required creatively rearranging sentence structures at times to achieve flow in the target text, while also ensuring the complete transfer of meaning. So I did have to transpose a great deal of the source text, but I also found these types of translation challenges to be easily resolved as compared to the other changes that had to be made in the text due to the extensive bibliographical research. I'm going to show you a couple examples, an example of the multiple languages. On the left, you can see the original quote from the Haitian historian Gerald Alexis was in the source text in French, and I'm not going to pronounce that. And then in the, you can see on the right how I translated this as during the October Revolution, it was transported to the West and ended up in England. Portrait of Henri Cristophe 1. This also then in the translation includes a footnote that reads, translated from French by S. Temaat. So the way I handled these was I went into DeepL and I did the best I could to work through these French translations, and then examined it with the research to see if it matched what the source text was saying. Then I submitted that to Professor Auerbach, who was so kind to look over the French for me and to help me with those. I'm going to go back again and talk a little bit about the extra linguistic challenges that I ran into with allusions and cultural elements. There are so many allusions to time periods, places, people, and historical events, governments, and movements in the source text. A very careful, nuanced translation of these elements was required for a history text. Some that I ran into. Batallas por la independencia de los Estados Unidos. It could not be considered accurate because the American colonies were not yet the United States. So I referred to authors such as Clammer in his parallel text, who offered better options, and I translated it as battles during the American Revolutionary War. I felt like for an English-speaking reader, especially for an English-speaking reader that might be reading this in the United States, that is a historian, they would pick up on that allusion to the historical event. There were allusions to historical roles. It has not been proven that Christophe actually fought in the Battle of Savannah in Georgia, so I found that the use of Lucho was problematic in the source text. It is documented that the ship that Christophe was on as a boy was transported to Savannah with the Jewels of Nineteenth-Century. I know I'm messing that up, Professor Auerbach. There is a statue located in Georgia that represents, you can go see it, it's quite fascinating, and they have some videos on it if you look it up. But there's a statue located in Georgia representing Christophe as a drummer boy rather than a soldier in the American Revolution. And his court record keeper, when I went back and did my research and read Christophe's court records, Baron de Basti, who was his record keeper, did later record that Christophe served in the wars of the American Revolution and was wounded at the Siege of Savannah. So for this reason, I chose the word served instead of fought, allowing for the ambiguity in the source text, since we are referring to actual historical roles and what these people did. The source text also refers to time periods when the current country of Haiti was known as French colony, an independent state, and later as a kingdom. I feel like that the author in the source text went back and forth between time periods, which she had to do as she was informing us of the history behind these paintings and behind the lives of the individuals. However, I felt like the author did not always make clear distinctions on Haiti's status within the source text. So I had to make small clarifications to the text for English readers unfamiliar with Haitian history, so they would know the status of the colony, the status of the state, and then later the status of the country when they were actually reading the target text. The cultural challenges that I encountered in the text, there were some, but they felt so minimal compared to the previous challenges that have already been discussed. My research did help me understand that words in the source text, such as Emperador Alejandro I and Tsar, needed historical and cultural clarification, while TSAR is the preferred spelling in Slavic scholarship. I realized, and by most historians, I realized that an international audience of English readers would not be well versed, possibly in Slavic scholarship, and the majority of English speakers throughout the United States are much more familiar with the commonly spelled CZAR, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary. So I just used CZAR, Tsar, in place of emperor, since its actual translation is Emperor of Russia. So I felt like that was a much better choice in the target text. My thesis committee recognizes these photos that are actually of the palace that Christophe constructed. Unfortunately, it is in ruins now in Haiti, but you can still observe portions of it. I included this at the end. I believe that the Haitian Revolution, the life of Henri Cristophe, the alliance of William Wilberforce, and the artistry of Richard Evans converged to create a contemporary portrait of our human condition that we still deal with today. The themes of human existence that played out in the colony of Saint-Domingue, the state of Haiti, and the Kingdom of Haiti during the late 18th century and early 19th centuries still play out in colonies, nations, human rights organizations, and museum exhibitions around the world. I believe Dr. Solivan-Robles has highlighted two priceless portraits of great historical significance to the history of the Caribbean: the Haitian Revolution, the freedom story of King Henri Cristophe. Since these portraits were once thought to be lost, her work is valuable to history, art, and the University of Puerto Rico. Her audience includes Spanish-speaking historians, artists, storytellers, and revolutionaries. And I hope my translation amplifies her voice to an international audience of English speakers. In the words of William Wilberforce, "You may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again that you did not know." And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shannon. I know that this was a very challenging project, and I think that you highlighted some of the challenges that you ran across. I'm not sure that you covered them all, but I would like to now turn over the floor to Professors Ramírez and Faraclas so that they could actually comment on the text and ask some questions of our thesis student here today, Shannon Temaat. Okay. I'm not sure whether you want to go, if either Jane or Nick, whether you'd rather go first. Jane, you're muted.
I don't care. Perhaps our guest would like to go first, or perhaps I could.
I have no preference, so.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead then.
Okay.
Just to get this going, and I know we have to be fairly brief to consider Luis's meeting coming up at 11:30. So I've been not crossing a few things off of my list. I'm going to totally destroy any suspense that might have been in anyone's mind and say this is an outstanding thesis. I am very impressed with the work that you've done, Shannon. Not the least surprised. You have been in my class, and I expected this from you. But obviously, you had some extreme challenges, especially in the sense of not having the final version of your source text until after you'd already done so much work and were eager to finish and defend your thesis, and then to be met with that must have been rather crushing, at least at the moment that it happened. Anyway, of course, I sympathize with the author as well, because I know things don't work to schedule, and of course, she wants to have a perfect text to publish, but it did make it rough on you, and you came through beautifully. You wrote this very beautifully. I had a few comments here and there, because I always do. In fact, I'm paying you a compliment and being rather nitpicking with my comments, because I know that you are at a level where even these small things can help you improve a little bit and be even better in the future. So I'm going to go to your preface. I'm going to get personal here. Shannon, you wrote such a beautiful tribute to your father, and it touched me very deeply. Especially in light of recent events. But really, I was reading along about this James Brinkley and the coppersmithing, and looking up coppersmithing to make sure it actually is not accepted as a word in Merriam-Webster's dictionaries, but I found it on a British craft site. I've listed it in the comments that I'm going to send you later, where I found it. And that was good enough for me. And besides, I liked it. It seemed perfect. But I was reading along and wondering a little where the connection was going to come, because obviously we were talking about the American Revolution in a text about the Haitian Revolution. So there's an obvious connection, and yet I was wondering where we were going. You have inherited your father's talent as a storyteller, because when your reveal came that you were talking about your own father, it caught me completely unawares, and I just sat there and stared at the screen for a little while. Very well done. Not only as a tribute to your father, but as a way of drawing your reader in to your preface, and a very appropriate choice of a very appropriate lead in. I have to ask if you have one of those copper medallions.
I do actually. My mother and my sisters and I all have one he saved for us.
Excellent. I'm glad to know that. Okay, I have a very short notes that I have, things in general that made me very happy reading your preface and then your thesis. One was your signing of your French translations. I think that's appropriate. I've been advocating translator visibility, not in interfering with translating the author style and so forth. I don't mean that, but I mean in the sense of there's no reason to not say your name, and it makes everything clear for the reader. For those readers who care, there's no mystery about, well, what translator are we talking about? Is this the translator who translated something in one of those original of those resources that the work cited and so forth to somebody else? No, it's the one who's translating this article. And you did it modestly with just an initial and then just at the end of it. I think that's better than writing trans, because translated by translator always sounded odd to me anyway. So I liked that very much. And it thrilled me that you use end dages. So few people have even heard of an end date, let alone know how to use it. And I was delighted to see the end dages. So that's just me, you know.
Well, Professor, can I say I learned that from you my first semester, so thank you.
Oh, good. I was just about to say I do teach that in most of my classes, so I'm glad to. And that ups the level of your professionalism. If you're going to be translating professionally, especially of academic texts, you need to go into things like end dages. And that puts you just an edge above the rest. So that would make me very happy. Okay. I don't think I'm going to display the text as I had intended to, but if any of you wishes to consult your own copy of the translation while I'm saying this, I want to say something about the very first sentence of your translation. That's the one where you list all the titles and say that this is a portrait of the king and a portrait of, basically what you're saying is this is a portrait of a king and of the prince. Now, there's actually an error in parallel structure, lack of parallel structure in that first sentence. It's hard to spot because that sentence is so long and so full of all these alternate titles. If you look at it, you'll see that there's a that of. You said a portrait of King Henry and that of his son. Well, that of doesn't fit when you strip down the sentence, and that's a very minor thing. But this is your very first sentence of this translation. And yes, you're translating what the author wrote, but you're also adding these alternate titles. I suggest leaving those titles to a second sentence and just have your first sentence say being, this is a portrait of King Henry. You can give the rest. Don't identify the men by the title of the painting is what I'm suggesting. Identify the men. Say that, talk about the men, not about the paintings. So this is portraits of these two men, and then do a second. That will increase the power of your first sentence. Will make it obvious that you don't want that of in there and eliminate that problem. And then you can go on in the second sentence and explain about the title and the alternate titles, which won't be an easy sentence to write, but you'll figure it out. That's just a suggestion. I'm jumping around, I guess I shouldn't be. Back in your preface, I did ask you in a couple of places, as I said, I'll be sending you all of these comments later. I this afternoon, where was I? I did ask for more context with some of your examples because it's relatively meaningless for you to just say, I translated this word as this word, unless we know what the context is. Maybe not for every single word that you mentioned, but there was one word where you had an infinitive, enviar, and you said you translated it as he sent. Well, as a translator, I know that could be a valid choice, of course, but I have no idea what that context is. So I wrote you a comment about that and reminding you that PGT publishes your preface, but it's a standalone. It's without the translation or the source text, which we readers of your preface know we're going to get to see this in situ, but it's not there in the preface, which is all that when PGT publishes it, I presume it's primarily for current and future students, and they're not going to get the benefit of your comments without context. That being said, the very next paragraph after I wrote all of that comment was a beautifully contextualized example, which was the discussion of the American Revolutionary War and how to call it. And there you did give us ample context and a full explanation. So you've got the idea. It's just there are a couple of, you could give us a little bit more context in a few areas. But
Thank you, Professor Jane, for that clarification. So the one about the American Revolutionary War, you felt like had the context that you were needing. It's just some of the others did not.
Mm-hmm. And as I said, I almost took back that first comment because you did so well on the next one. I thought, no, it's worth mentioning that.
I appreciate that. I think there were so many examples in this text because it's such a complex text. So at times I had difficulty giving context. So I felt like there was so much to the context of the source text. So I actually appreciate you mentioning that. I would like to include more context.
And as I said, you can, if you have a list of them, of examples, but you can list several and then choose just one or two to give a specific context for. I'm still puzzled about that NVR one because I didn't find it, because when I'm reading the translation, I forget to look for that, for all the things that you mentioned in your preface. But again, I'm thinking in terms of the reader. I always try to think in terms of clarity for the reader, and that's going to come up again in a couple other things I'm going to say. But then I do have one question. I try to pick on just a few of these things, and this is one that I want the answer to because I'm curious. What happened to the original, the source text footnote number 2? It's just not there. And, I know that footnote numbers are going to change But it's a long one in which the author is writing about her research and her project and things that they consulted and so forth. Okay. I'm on page 2 of the source text. At the bottom of the page, we have the end of footnote 1, which was quite long. It carried over from one page to the next. But then halfway down in that second paragraph, there's a 2. Hace más de 10 años atrás comenzamos con esta investigación. Fue entonces que a partir del estudio de los fuentes primarios and so forth. And that footnote's not in the translation.
I'm trying to find, so it's on page 2 in the source text, where it starts out, hace más de 10 años.
Right. Either I'm blind or that footnote's not in your translation. And I thought maybe it's something that you took out in the later version. But then everything else corresponded perfectly from the source text that you sent me to the translation. And it did seem to me like something that I would take out if I were going to eliminate a footnote, but. Well, I thought you were going to be able to, go ahead.
That footnote was modified. I did not, her first footnote on, in the source text, footnote number 1 is very, very lengthy. I included as much of that as I could. The footnote number 2 is modified, but it was not intended to be modified that much and to eliminate that information. So when I went over, because one of my footnotes I actually had to eliminate and then put back into the source text, but this was not it.
Yes.
And I had to do that for copyright reasons from the actual source text in English. But that was not the case with footnote number 2. As I modified it, it looks like I simply did miss that portion. And I think it was probably when I was doing the formatting, it kept losing some of my footnotes. And I would have to go back over and over when it would go to, when you have the lengthy footnotes and it goes to the next page, you have to be so careful not to lose any part of that footnote. And so now that I'm noticing that, I think that is what happened. And on my last run through, somehow I missed that section of the second footnote. So I appreciate you bringing that to my attention.
Well, good. Then that's something that you can fix. And yes.
Yeah, that's a big deal. So thank you.
I have had that very same problem with footnotes running over and some of it getting lost and the formatting getting messed up. So I sympathize. Okay, that left me curious because you've been so meticulous in this work, and I know because I've done academic translating, I know how tedious footnotes can be, particularly when they're long. So okay, and you've done so well. By the way, that one you mentioned with the explanation of that footnote where the source text had the English in the footnote, which then of course she just provided your translation for you and there was no need for the footnote. Somehow I didn't follow that in the explanation that you gave in the preface. It wasn't, in fact, I went and after I read the preface, while I was reading the preface, I jumped to the source text and found footnote number 10. So I was able, oh, now I see, now I get it. So either that explanation needs to be given a little more context, or your readers might not understand it, because if I didn't get it, there's going to be at least some others that are not going to get it. So for clarity, for the sake of the reader, maybe you want to look at that one for context. But okay, so the footnote, what happened? I have just two other, and the last one may take a bit. Do we need? I'm having to adjust myself because I've been saying Christophe all this time, not Christophe. Is that how it's usually pronounced in English? I don't know as I've ever been in an actual discussion of no. David saying no?
There are many different there's the French pronunciation, which I kept tending to use, and so I was trying to get away from the French pronunciation for an English speaking audience, but I feel more comfortable just using in that sense, even though he went ahead and he very much had this desire to anglicize his name to make his name very much like the kings of England. He was designing his monarchy after the English monarchy, and so he had this tendency to break with that. But in history, we still view him in light of the French and in light of his French name. And so Henri Cristophe, it would be how it's better to be said, is my understanding. But Professor Auerbach, I do not know French, so you can correct me on that.
And it's you know, the Henry part, I can handle the Henry part, okay, but the Christophe is a little bit. But look, none of this was oral before. I've only seen, you know, we didn't even discuss his name before. I don't think, in terms of pronunciation. I've only heard the French version, Henri Cristophe. So the only thing I would say is I would be careful in the future, and probably use the French pronunciation. The only reason I tell you this is because there's a tendency among art historians and art scholars whose native language is English to mispronounce so many names of famous artists, of subjects, and so and it sometimes, you know, I mean, Bruegel, for example, which is an invention that doesn't exist really. You know, there's so many examples, and so I would be careful, and I would just use the French. And I'm sorry, even though now that you say this, I understand entirely what you were doing. But the toffee part, if you have to say Henry, that's okay. But the toffee part for me is just too much. So
thank you, Professor. That was one thing I was going to actually discuss with you all in this discussion today. So I really appreciate that.
Now, but since we're here, and I know that Jane has more to say, and so does Nicholas, but is there an error in the source text in terms of the very title of the piece? It says Jean-Victor. It says
Professor, in my research, yes, I believe there is. And I left it, since it is an unfinished, unpublished text, to be true to Solivan-Robles' work, but I honestly was not sure how to, if I should correct her source text.
Yes, I think you should, because there's no indication whatsoever that it's Jean-Victor, it's Jacques-Victor. So that has to be corrected, and she has to be informed of that, because that in itself could be extremely embarrassing for her. And, you know, it's not a matter of you know, worshiping the source text. It's a matter of saving the source text author from future embarrassment.
And since we're mentioning that, there's also one place where you add the information that these paintings are currently being exhibited on loan to London. by the time, I don't know how long that loan is for. Possibly by the time people are reading her article, the pictures are already back. So that's something that she should be aware of is in there, so that they can adjust that if necessary. I mean, I appreciated that you added that information, because I was thinking, okay, can I pack up my walker into my car and get myself over to Lázaro and go see these things? Well, the pictures aren't there at the moment anyway. So
well, and I did include that because I actually went to look for them, and they found out they were on loan. So felt like that needed to be there for my committee. But in the future, as far as how to handle that, yeah, I do appreciate your feedback.
And I'm sorry, I have a question too about the loan situation, because it's concerning. And I mean, were these portraits ever exhibited at Lázaro?
Yes, they are housed at Lázaro.
They're housed there, but were they ever exhibited?
I believe so, because when I spoke with the professor who is in charge of the collection, she did inform me that they were just recently sent to London. I may be misunderstanding that. I do know that Professor Faraclas is a scholar of Caribbean, history and studies. So I don't know if you have some light to shed on that, possibly, but it's my understanding, yes, that they have been at the library at the UPR.
As far as I know, I'm not aware of whether they were ever on display or exhibited in Lázaro. I wish I could help with that.
At one point, I have a memory, I don't know where it was, that you said specifically about the one of the prince, that it was on the wall, that was hanging in, or at some time was on in Lázaro. I could be mistaken. I could be remembering wrong, and I don't know whether that was meant the main part of the library or still just in the rare books. I don't know. I've never been in there.
Professor, that is entirely possible, because the actual portrait of the prince, the UPR has the only one that exists. There are others of the king still in existence, but the UPR does own the collection with the only remaining one of the prince. And so again, that's why Dr. Solivan-Robles' work is so important, because it's that last remaining portrait of the prince.
And I think actually it's worthwhile pursuing this information, pursuing the information as to where they are, for how long, and what their status will be in terms of display, because these are actually extremely important works. Yes. In fact, they may be among the most important works that are held in terms of artworks that are being held at Lázaro. And it would be, the only thing that I could say is that to get the museum involved, or I'm not sure if they have information about they have information about these works, but they would be a very reliable source for future display and also future preservation, which may not be happening at Lázaro. And I'm concerned about it. I'll just say that.
Yeah, that's one of those things I wondered about, and I'm not in the field of art, so that I'm not very knowledgeable about those things, but I was concerned as I read it, wondering, well, if they have them, can people see them? Do people know that that's there? Have they been exhibited? Will they be exhibited? And is there what kind of precautions are being taken?
Doctor,
we all know what happened to the PGT's office during the aftermath of the hurricanes and made it completely uninhabitable. So, yeah, I worry about things like that.
Thank you for saying that, because this is a really important part of Dr. Solivan-Robles' work, is finding and locating very historic art pieces in Viejo San Juan, and also at the UPR. So I feel like this is important because she kind of brings to light, hey, these exist, this is where they are, they need to be studied, they need to be protected.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I know we need to move on, and I'd love to go on talking, but I actually brought up this whole can of worms, open this can of worms over just a simple translation question. There's so much variation on Henri and Henry and Christophe, with or without the first H after the C. And of course, when you're quoting somebody else, when you're quoting this is the way it was titled at this particular exhibition, or this is a quotation from one of the from a source text here, or from some cited text. But when it's just you writing, or Jennifer, sorry, I forgot her, Solivan-Robles writing, it seems to me that there ought to be consistency in always using Henri and without the first H, without the H, without the first H, Christophe, together, and always using Henry and with the first H. Maybe that's totally wrong, because, something I don't know. For some reason, I don't know. But I did see at least one time, which is why I made this note, where you just were talking about the man and you said Henri Christophe with the H in it. So do you think my colleagues, do you think that should be addressed consistently, or is there so much?
No, it should be standardized throughout. I mean, it should be consistent and standardized, and it should be CH, if that's what I'm understanding, CH Christophe, no? Is that what you're talking about? First H missing? Yeah, it should be standardized. The other thing too, I should say, and I noted it a few times, Shannon, when we were working together on this, but the hyphenation is not, there are some cases where the hyphenation really, I think, needs to be fixed a little bit, with the Henri Cristophe and the Jacques-Victor. I think there are a few cases where that you need to go through that again.
Okay.
Maybe.
I was keeping to the source text on some of those, and you've clarified for me that I can make those corrections to make it more consistent. Thank you.
She makes a lot of mistakes. She makes a lot of mistakes, and those mistakes, you fixed most of them, but you should be consistent in terms of fixing them all. And as I said, this is not about bowing down to religiously to the source text. It's about saving the author from future embarrassment.
Exactly.
Anyway, Jane, if you don't mind, because we're going,
may I have one more minute? I promise it'll be just a minute.
Yes.
I talk in detail about this in my comments. I don't think you have to be religiously devoted to the idea of not using those personal pronouns, those first person pronouns, because sometimes it was so awkward that with the reader, with the author, I didn't even know what author you were talking about. This is art. This is history. Those are about people. This is not rocket science, literally. This is not an article about physics or about chemistry. This is about an art history. There's emotions. It's personal. I think you can occasionally, I understand what you're doing, but I think there's okay to occasionally put in a week, and I will stop right there. Excellent job.
Thank you,
I'm very
Professor.
proud to have had any connection with your preparation for this, because it's very good.
Okay, Nicholas, if you don't mind, your own comments and observations and questions.
Yes, well, first of all, I'd like to echo Professor Ramirez's comment that this is an excellent, excellent thesis. And I think it's a credit to you, but also a credit to the program. The translation program in humanities has always been an outstanding program, and I can see that that has always been consistent in the past and continues to be something that you should all be proud of. So this was a very wonderful, wonderful piece of work. And my question to you, my basic question to you is, where would you like to take this? In other words, has this sort of piqued your interest in work in this on translating documents from this particular period, or do you see this as a more of like an exercise in demonstrating what you're capable of, and then moving on to other things? In other words, in terms of what you would like to do in the future with this. I'm not that familiar with the trajectory that translators usually follow. And for example, would you consider doing a PhD, et cetera, et cetera?
Thank you, Professor. Yes, this article piqued my interest. I will say that when I came to the translation program, I had a great deal of interest in legal translation. I had been a court interpreter in Kansas. Even though I was a teacher, I would fill in as a court interpreter at a small county court, and really enjoyed doing that. And so when I had the opportunity to go back to school, I was really going to pursue legal translation, and I still have such a great interest in it. I really enjoyed your class, Professor Auerbach, in legal translation. It was very insightful, and I feel like it prepared me very well, because what I was lacking was the translation skills to match interpretation skills. And so that was my interest. However, like you can see the trajectory of my life, I've had such a fascination with museums, such a fascination with history, such a fascination with art. And so the museum translation class by Professor Auerbach was such a fun class, and I was very passionate about my work in that class. And that opened some opportunities at the exhibition there at the museum at the UPR, as well as with the publications with Vision Doble. So as far as if I could pursue something I'm passionate about and just excited about, I would love to be involved in museum translation, historical translation. I do have the background in academia, so that makes it, while I will agree with Professor Ramirez that academic texts are so troublesome, and at times you just feel like you're in the weeds and you just kind of want to get away from all those footnotes and everything. I do feel like I have the background that prepares me for that. So yes, I would like to see what doors open up for me to continue in museum and historical translation. And while I'm not pursuing a PhD right now, I definitely won't rule it out of my future.
Yeah, okay. And there's no reason why you have to make a binary decision here or zero-sum game decision. You could try to combine all of it and have it all, because legal translation, there is a legal side to. I think Professor Auerbach really dramatized the responsibilities and irresponsibilities of museums and their collections and all of these kind of things. So there is a legal side to this. And there's also a community side to this in terms of responsibilities to communities, especially in areas that are usually plundered by museums. So places in the Caribbean, Haiti, this would be a really wonderful connection you could make with people in Haiti, for example, in the future, if you decided to go that direction. And that wouldn't, of course, stop you from doing a PhD. So again, I think that really the future lies with, or successful careers in the future lie with this kind of very creative and out of the box way of putting things together. Okay, legal, community, Caribbean history, translation, interpretation, putting it all together to make something, to give you something that you can offer that's unique and that could really serve in contexts like, say, Lazaro's relation with wherever these paintings have gone in London, this kind of thing, and what the relation is between London, Lazaro, and then institutions in Haiti, for example. And then the relationship to communities in Haiti. In other words, people who are involved in educational endeavors in Haiti, and what role these paintings could play in the kind of programs that they put together for kids, or at any different level. You know, it could go all the way up to university level. So again, I see a lot of possibilities here, but I wanted to first get an idea from you what you wanted to do before I plan your future for you. In any case, yeah, I agree 100%. I respect your attempts to anglicize the name, but I think that really, especially if you want to speak about this project in the future and in public, it would be wise to stick with the French pronunciation. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. I just want to say that your work in the Caribbean has meant a great deal. As I've learned, you know, I've just learned just the surface of what you do, but I really appreciate you being in this discussion, because I wanted to bring you in because it was important to me, because I know you're doing a lot with Caribbean studies.
Well, yeah, but again, we need more people to do things in ways that are following paths that haven't been followed before. And I think that this particular project does that. It brings together a lot of things, because in the figure of Henri Cristophe, and then in his relationship with Wilberforce, again, if you want to take this a little bit further, there are all kinds of important points that can be made in terms of a relationship like that. So again, like you said, most people are not conscious of Henri Cristophe and even the Haitian Revolution in terms of when we're talking about what comes out, what are the outputs of public education in places like the US, etc. So I think that even those people who are aware of the fact that there was a Haitian Revolution, and even people who are aware that there was an Henri Cristophe, they would probably attribute the abolition of chattel enslavement more to somebody like Wilberforce than Henri Cristophe. And this is something that really, really needs to be challenged. Now, I'm not saying that that was your role here in this translation, but again, if you want to make this into something that you do as a career path, there are all kinds of ways to connect it back to responsibility to Caribbean communities, because really the main thing that was responsible for overturning chattel enslavement was in fact the revolts, the constant state of revolt in Haiti, in Jamaica, in Suriname. So they turned the jewels of the French and British and Dutch empires into total battle zones that they eventually couldn't manage anymore, and they had to figure out a new way to do it. Doesn't mean that the new way that they figured out wasn't as devilish as the old one. It just means that it forced them to to change the system and abolish chattel enslavement and replace it with wage enslavement. Okay, so those are the kinds of interesting things you could do with all of this, plus the fact that Christophe, again, I'm really glad that you traced his role back to the Revolutionary War in what became the United States. That's very important. And you traced it back to Virginia, because in fact, those would probably, Haiti and Virginia are probably two of the key areas in the greater Caribbean. And I consider Virginia to be in the greater Caribbean, especially during that time, as very key points in terms of points of resistance, but also points of reconfiguration of systems. So really, you probably wouldn't have got the kind of chattel enslavement that you ended up with in Haiti under the French, which was probably the most chattel enslavement taken to its extreme, like 2 years of life expectancy. Yes, that's very true. But you probably wouldn't have gotten that without what happened in Virginia earlier on in terms of the Bacon's Rebellion and all of the ways that the ruling colonial classes in Virginia had to reconfigure their system in the face of revolts that involved the unity of people of indigenous descent, European descent, and African descent. So they really had to racialize the system of labor, and that's a very important element in this. So the connections between Haiti and Virginia, very important, and glad you brought it out. But you can even take it back further. So if you take it back further, it's important. I think that Henri Cristophe was, I mean, of course, these things are very speculative, but was of Bambara origin. So in terms of the ethnic group that he might have traced, or one of the ethnic groups that he would have traced his origins to, would be Bambara. And the thing about Bambara, there's a lot we could say about Bambara. One thing we could say about Bambara was the fact that it was an ethnic group that had been profoundly influenced by Islam. Again, this is really important and a part of the American story that's not told, especially in terms of the enslaved, because many of the enslaved people in the Americas, including the Caribbean, who were either practicing Muslims or came from ethnic groups that were predominantly Muslim, played key roles in revolutionary movements. So this is another thing. So again, this is another aspect to this that's fascinating. But that's one strand of resistance that comes through this. But another strand of resistance that can come through, that can be seen to come through this, is something that has to do with, again, those people who are aware of the Haitian Revolution almost automatically think that, this is the very first time that the enslaved in the Afro-Atlantic overturned a plantation regime. I'm really glad that the way you phrased this, because you phrased this very nicely. You said with a state, and in other words, the plantation regime was overturned, and you said, and a state established. And I think that's the big difference from what came before, because this was not the first time a plantation regime was permanently overturned in the Afro-Atlantic. The first time goes all the way back to the 1500s, the late 1500s, in Sao Tome, Annobon, and Príncipe. And there you have a very similar scenario to what happened in Haiti. All of the elements, Maroons, the enslaved, banding together with the networking of women's marketing networks and things like that, to overturn and permanently overturn plantation regimes, such that Sao Tome and Príncipe is actually taken out of the picture and removed as the world center for sugar production, and it moves after there to Brazil. So yes, all of these strands can be brought together, and in terms of using these images for educational purposes, in terms of, I mean, imagine what more consciousness around the depth of the of the traditions of resistance and successful traditions of resistance in the Afro-Atlantic would mean to children or other people in educational settings in the Afro-Atlantic to really understand that Haiti is actually part of a tradition that goes much further back, and that a lot of people probably crossed the Atlantic already knowing about what happened in Sao Tome and Principe, and that was part of the body of knowledge that was shared in the dungeons in West Africa of people who were enslaved waiting to make the crossing, or in those ship hulls where people were carried across. But this gets to another point that I think is very hard to negotiate. I think you did a good job of doing it, but I'm going to suggest of ways that it can be pushed. Okay, you talk about offensive language, and you talk about mass ownership, and etc. And I think that you handled that well in that particular case. And also, to a certain extent, you did replace the terms slavery, slave with enslaved, enslavement to a degree to a greater degree than most people do. Okay, but I think you could have actually done it more. Again, this is something that's in a state of flux, and so I don't think that I would change anything right now. Although I did kind of highlight some of the times that you could have said enslavement rather than slavery. But now, black and white. Okay, so what do we do with those terms? If you're ready to change the terms that refer to ownership in the act of enslavement, and if you're ready to change slavery to enslavement, okay, when do we reach the point where pioneering translators could begin to start to change the way we translate black and white? In other words, either people raced as black and people raced as white, to show that it, just like enslavement, it's something that's imposed on somebody. It's not something about who you are. It's about how a system of domination has raced you, just like a system of domination has enslaved you. So again, in the future, those might be other frontiers, but I can't fault you for not doing that. Okay, as a translator, in other words, how much liberty do you take in those directions? I mean, that's again, it just depends on a lot of contextual factors. Okay, there was one glaring sort of theme in the text. It's on page. Let me just get the document up here. It's on page 8 of the translation. In line number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it says 2 non-black groups of the revolutionary movements. It should be non-white, according to what's in the original. So that's just one thing that stood out to me, because I was really looking at it from the point of view of the content more than the form. There are probably other things in the content I didn't catch because I couldn't. Let me just quickly go through some others in the text. Okay, okay, on page 13, last paragraph. All right, okay, I do a lot of editing. I mean, like, I feel like almost like a medium. Okay, I'm just channeling other people's work. Okay, but my computer is permanently on setting where I can see all of the non-typed characters. Okay, and I have a real phobia of these little circles. Okay, because sometimes they don't print out well. So in other words, you've got some of those little circles left. I'd advise you to take wherever you have those little baby circles. You know what I'm talking about? I don't know what they're called technically. Do you know what they're called?
You're talking about reveal source on the,
reveal.
you know, I mean, if you, or actually you can just hit the paragraph symbol. It should show up then. If there for any extraneous symbols will show up. And I mean, there are other ones that could be there.
Thank you for mentioning those, Professor. I did have to allow for that to keep her titles together. So when I do my final version, would it be better to just eliminate all of those?
Because they can be devilish in terms of when if this stuff gets printed out actually physically. Okay, but I think Luis knows the term.
Yeah, he just said what you can do.
Yeah, Luis has given you some nice, some better advice than I could ever do, because I don't even know what to call them. And Luis had the name and everything. So, okay, there's that.
Thank you, Luis.
It's just to avoid headaches in the future in terms of formatting and stuff like that. Yeah, okay. Let me see what else I got here.
By the way,
yeah,
a space for a space. Yeah, and you can do that also, you know, for things like, you know, if you don't have curled apostrophes or curled quotation marks, all you have to do is just replace an apostrophe with an apostrophe, and that'll get rid of it. But by the way, Nick, this actually is not going to be printed in any form. It's going to exist, you know, virtually as a PDF for the preface itself. I mean, hopefully, and this is something, you know, I don't know how much Shannon really wants to get involved with this in the future, but hopefully, Shannon, you will see the publication of this text, at least online, as a visión doble text, no? You're not sure?
I hope to, yes.
You're not sure? Because I know that would involve a lot more, perhaps, work than, you know.
I would be interested in it. It would just be a matter of collaborating with Dr. Solivan-Robles to see when she is going to publish hers and then follow suit. Okay.
All right. And I think that her work needs to be, you know, go through other levels of editing before that's going to be happening. But I would, you know, I would urge you to do it also, because then you have a publication, you know, so that's a reason to do it, you know, to have and it's for your CV, just for practical purposes, you know, so there you can say, here's my name in neon lights, you know, but
yes,
anyway.
I've come so close. I might as well finish.
You might as well. And you know, I think actually you have it pretty much finished in terms of what you know, what she did. Nick, do you have any other comments? Because I think we have.
I've got some, but I think in the version that I sent to you, David, I think it has yesterday. I think that has my these are just little nitpicky things. I think
you sent something to me. Did you send something to me?
Yes, I sent it to you. I sent it to all of you.
Okay. Just a little bit of warning here, and this is also to Shannon, and it's important information right now.
Not to Shannon, but to the other.
Well, now that I'm presently in Ireland, oh, you got it too, Luis, or to okay, that you should be sent it, whatever. Yes, of course, but Outlook, because I'm outside of Puerto Rico right now, the administration has banned me from using Outlook. I can use every other application and platform known to UPR, but not Outlook, because I'm forbidden from doing that because I'm not present. So until that's worked out, I try to use it on my phone, but my phone doesn't update all the time either. So I'll provide you with my, Shannon, do you have my personal email address?
I don't believe so, Professor.
Well, maybe I can just, I'll share it with you. Okay, yeah. Well, Luis got it as well, but I didn't get it because I think
because Luis is Luis in Puerto Rico.
no, Luis is in Puerto Rico. I'm not in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, because that's exactly right. Luis would have gotten it because he's in Puerto Rico. You
Oh,
wouldn't
okay.
have.
I didn't know he was CC'd on it, and I guess he was.
No,
Okay.
Jane too was CC'd on that. I don't know.
Okay, I didn't receive it.
I haven't had
It's
time to
because
look
you're
at
in
it yet.
Ireland.
Okay.
I haven't
Okay,
looked at it at all, but I got it.
Okay, eventually, if you could get those to Shannon, then she would see the little things that I did. The only thing of substance that I thought there was really crucial in terms of conceptually was the fact that you at one point you mentioned, I think it's on Roman numeral XIV, page Roman numeral XIV 14, is that you say the people who were forcibly taken from Africa to Haiti. And again, a lot of the people who ended up in Haiti as enslaved people in Haiti did not come directly from Africa, which of course you point out very well because Christophe himself, Henri Cristophe himself, passed through at least Grenada or St. Lucia. So, I mean, you're aware of it. It's just that these are the kinds of things that people usually in the audience sort of assume. And maybe you don't assume them, but you have to be careful of the way you say them to make sure you're not reinforcing notions that have been received about enslavement and about the relationship with the Caribbean, West Africa, etc., and between and among the different areas of the Caribbean. In other words, it erases all kinds of connections that lead to people thinking of the Caribbean as like the French Caribbean and the English Caribbean, the Dutch Caribbean, the Spanish Caribbean. And it was the balkanization of the Caribbean, again, happens through this type of repetition. Okay, well, those were my main points.
I appreciate your comments and I thank you so much. They're just so valuable. I really appreciate it. I have been learning a lot more this semester in the class with Wuye, and I have taken her classes dealing with, and we do talk about the slave trade and have learned so much. So I really appreciate your wise expertise as well in contributing to this text.
Yeah, but again, just congratulations. Congratulations.
Okay.
And
I think we sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. But we have to proceed now to our determination. So I think Luis, if you're there, I think Shannon needs to be. We need to go off live streaming. I'd like to welcome everyone back, and I'd like to welcome, of course, our candidate here, Shannon Temaat. And Shannon, we've all agreed that you've done a tremendous amount of work. And actually, I don't think that you've given yourself enough credit for what you've done in terms of polishing a text. And that's very important. And it's, an aspect of translation that's not really considered quite often. It's the unanimous decision of this committee that you should get a sobresaliente, but also con recomendación de publicar. So
thank you so much. Thank you. It's been an honor and a blessing to work with each one of you and have you as part of my committee and have you as my advisor, and to also be a part of the PGT program that has just been phenomenal in preparing me for this work.
Congratulations, Shannon. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Shannon.
A great pleasure working with you. So I think we're ready to say goodbye to our audience, but a great experience. And now, I'm so curious about those works. I really am.